Hello, class. Welcome to week 2. I'm going to take a few minutes, talk through a little bit of a presentation with you that's going to introduce us to our material for this week, which is chapter 1, revised, of a book that I wrote several years ago for critical thinking. I did some revisions to the chapter, and I'm going to present just this one chapter to you of that book. We've got lots of other things to do other than just read through that book, given how I'm doing the class these days. So it's a little bit has changed about that. But this is a good grounding chapter in that it will set some of the terminology that we're going to use for the rest of the chapter. And maybe we'll do chapter 2 of that book, but we'll see. So let's get into it now. So here we are. This is our introduction to critical thinking, if you will. We had a little bit of time last week to introduce ourselves to each other, to think a little bit about information and where information might come from. And I thought I would start by talking to us about this chapter. I'm going to make myself a little smaller so that you can see. But critical thinking is systematic evaluation or formulation of beliefs or statements by rational standards. And the key there is by rational standards. And what do we mean by rational? I don't mean rational like rational and irrational as a psychologist might think through them. We will have time to talk a little bit about that. But what I mean is supported by reasons. There are rules that any thinker can figure out by thinking enough about it. But there's rules for the giving and evaluation of reasons, right? We want reasons to be relevant. We want reasons to be truth conducive, right? So if I give you a reason for a claim, it should provide a reason for thinking that that claim is true, right? And so we'll get into some of this more, but let's break down the pieces of that. It's systematic because there are going to be distinct procedures and methods in critical thinking for evaluating beliefs or information. Some of those distinct procedures and methods we will talk about. Others we can leave for future logic classes, should you ever take any of those. Harper does offer Philosophy 102, which is, we call, it's advanced logic, but in most places it's just called introductory logic or symbolic logic because it's purely formal symbol manipulation and evaluation of arguments that way. We're not going to get into those procedures, but critical thinking involves systematic procedures, even though it's a little broader than logic. The evaluation, but also the formulation of beliefs or statements. So we want to, if someone gives us a statement, we want to evaluate that statement in terms of its truth or falsehood, right? Is this true? Are there more reasons in favor of believing this claim than there are reasons against believing this claim? And these standards are rational. So no one would shake a magic 8-ball, look at what it says, and then decide to believe on those grounds, right? That is an irrational way of forming beliefs, right? It has nothing to do with reasons. That's not a reason at all. But if I say I believe the earth is somewhat spherical because of the shape of its shadow on the moon, that is a reason. It's relevant. Could still turn out to be wrong, but that's the kind of game we want to play, right? We want to offer reasons that are relevant to the truth of the beliefs in question. And we will practice that as we go. So that's just a general definition of critical thinking. What you might do if you want is fire open your favorite chat bot, whether it is GPT-4 or ChatGPT or Google's Bard, and ask it to characterize critical thinking. Part of using those, and we're going to have an opportunity to use those later, but part of those is giving it good instructions. So you might say, what is a definition of critical thinking suitable for a college class? Break it down into its pieces and see what it might give you, right? I bet it gives you something kind of like this. And then you can see whether it stacks up, right? Does it compare favorably or disfavorably to the definition that I have provided? And this is more or less a definition you see in lots of critical thinking textbooks. You will see this in Lewis Vaughn's The Power of Critical Thinking, for instance. So it's a common way. So this is not an idiosyncratic way of thinking about critical thinking. It's just one way, right? It's systematic, so it's not haphazard. You're not just picking and choosing what to believe, but we are going to evaluate and formulate beliefs. That is primarily what we're going to be doing this semester. And we're going to be doing it by rational standards in a way that always keeps in mind that we're aiming for truth, right? The truth is the goal. And we're going to be good little gamblers, right? We're going to be placing bets. We're going to say, I bet that these reasons taken all together might make this belief more likely to be true or make that belief more likely to be false. And we'll get there together. But let's start with the definition, get that under our belt. How might we distinguish critical thinking? Well, I will make myself even smaller on the screen. We might contrast critical thinking with rhetoric. If you were to ask a philosopher how they define rhetoric, they might sort of hearken back to Plato's definition of rhetoric, or at least the way he sort of talks about it in some of his dialogues, where rhetoric is really the art of how to get people to agree with you. We might say these days that rhetoric is the study of how best to persuade an audience to adopt a certain attitude. But notice the truth is not the goal, right? The goal is getting people to agree with you. If I want people to be angry, if that's the attitude I'm going for, then rhetoric might help me figure out how to make a group of people angry. If I want them to be happy, then rhetoric might be a good place to start in order to figure out how to make a group of people have that attitude, happiness. So you have to think politics for rhetoric, because that's what a good politician does, right? A politician doesn't necessarily aim for truth. A politician wants you to agree with him or her. Critical thinking, on the other hand, cares exclusively about truth. How do we get there? Well, what beliefs are worth believing? We may not know for sure, and the first chapter dispels the myth that certainty is our criteria, but nonetheless, we want to know what to believe. What beliefs or statements are worthy of my acceptance? Politics does not ask this question often. They will talk about that sometimes, but we care more here. So, critical thinking is the study of what makes beliefs worth believing. Those that have good reasons on their side, right? Those that appeal to reliable sources of information, or that appeal to a consensus of experts, or and so on. And we'll get to all that. So we'll work together on that. And it involves logic. So it's not the same as logic. Logic is but one tool that we can use to analyze beliefs. We're not going to use formal logic much, but we will have a chance to talk a little bit about arguments, forming arguments, presenting reasons for our side as we do critical thinking, but we're not going to get too lost in the weeds for logic. And why is this important? Well, this is a passage from the Lewis Vaughn book I mentioned before, which I've taught with a lot, and I quite like this passage. To critically examine your beliefs is to critically examine your life, because your beliefs in large part define your life. At least that's what Lewis Vaughn says. And there's a bit of truth to this. Many of the beliefs we might have because of how we were raised. We might have because of how we were taught when we were young, or we might have because we picked them up on the radio or on a podcast or wherever. But what makes those beliefs my beliefs? Well, beliefs truly become your beliefs or our beliefs when we examine them critically and then choose to accept them on those grounds. Not merely because someone told me, but because I, for myself, judge that they're true based on all the information I have at my disposal. For instance, right, I might have a belief about the age of the universe, and I just say, yeah, the universe is really old, I think it's 13.89 billion years old. That seems about right. But is that my belief, or am I just parroting something else? What makes it mine? Well, now I might go do more than just ask Google. I might say, is there some survey of all the world's leading physicists where they converge and say, yeah, it's about 13.89 billion years old? Yes. Do they have reliable methods of figuring out the age of the universe? Yes. Do I know what those are? I do not. I am not a physicist. But as long as they do, that's good enough for me. So I go look at it, do the best I can of figuring out what the experts think about the age of the universe, and I say, now I believe it. Now, it doesn't matter. The point of me illustrating this is not to say that I'm right or that I'm wrong, but notice the difference. In one case, I sort of uncritically accepted something as a belief. In the second case, I've now critically accepted it. I've examined it. I've looked it over. I've tried arguments against it. I've tried arguments in its favor, and I've decided, yes, that is what I'm going to believe, and I think I have good reasons for it. Now, that belief is mine. It's a little bit more authentically held than the earlier case where I've uncritically accepted it. So with critical thinking, we can provide skills for learning and exploring. That's good news. It provides a defense against error, so it will make us less likely, I hope, to get duped. Very famously, one of the behavioral economists, Daniel Kahneman, we're going to read a little bit from him later in the class, but he was being interviewed once, and he was asked, do you think, because you study, people and their economic decisions and how bad they are at so many things and how we get duped systematically under all these circumstances, do you think that makes you any better of a thinker than let's say the average person? And he says no, right? Because some errors that we make are just how the human mind works, and he doesn't want to claim that in any way he's better just because he studies how the human mind works. It doesn't mean his mind works any differently. But if we're careful and we deploy our tools well, they can help us defend ourselves against error, manipulation, and prejudice. And it could be a tool for self-discovery as well. So we are going to talk a little bit about arguments as the course goes on, primarily because we're going to be concerned with offering reasons for our views. And we're going to want to find good reasons for our views. And an argument is going to help us do that. It's not always the case that we have to have an argument. But if we do have an argument, there's going to be a collection of statements, and some of those statements will be alleged by the person putting the argument forward to provide reasons for accepting the conclusion. And we in logic or in philosophy often use the word statement, but I want to be clear that a statement is not a piece of language. We can use language to make statements, but the statement is the content, if you will. So just as an example, you see 3 sentences there on the screen: Der Schnee ist weiß, la neige est blanche, and snow is white. Those are 3 sentences of 3 different languages. We have a German sentence, we have a French sentence, and I have an English sentence. But those sentences all make the same statement. So the German sentence makes the same statement as the English sentence. The statement is not German or English. The statement is the content of those sentences, if you will. This is not going to matter too much to us, but if you do use the internet for some sources, you will see as it's common usage to talk about statements or propositions as the contents of sentences, where sentences are bits of actual language that people speak, and the proposition is the content of those sentences. So we have 3 sentences, 1 proposition or 1 statement. It's just a little bit of usage. You've been warned. That is how many people and philosophers use the word. So we've got a statement, which is just an assertion that something is or is not the case. Your introductory chapter this week introduces that to you. If we have an argument, you can have premises, which are the reasons given in support of the conclusion. And an argument is when you put all that together. A group of statements, the premises are alleged to provide support for the conclusion. So those are some key terms from our chapter. To help you do that, our chapter does mention indicator words, so I encourage you to review those indicator words. Typically, if you see therefore or thus, people don't really say thus or ergo, that what follows is going to be the conclusion to an argument. I've been giving you reasons. Look at the shadow of the earth on the moon, it's round. Therefore, I might conclude the earth is spherical. Therefore points to the conclusion. But if you see a word like because, usually what follows it is a premise or a reason offered in favor of something else. I was late to work because I got a flat tire. Right? The flat tire is the reason for the tardiness. So because. Sometimes because is just a causal sense of the word because, right? But sometimes it can be a reason giving because. So I encourage you to familiarize yourself with indicator words. Okay, let's do 3 examples together. After those 3 examples, I'm going to turn you loose to work on your chapter and to do a little in the discussion forum this week. So here's example 1. Adam obviously stole the money, for 3 people saw him do it. Compare that to Adam stole the money because he needed it to buy food. Interesting. So what gives? Well, I guess I should back up. I will back up to that argument 1. Pardon me for a second. Okay. So the word for there is a premise indicator. 3 people saw Adam steal the money, it says. Therefore, Adam stole the money. Right? That provides a reason for believing he's the one who stole it. Believing he is the one who stole it. And if I said Adam stole the money because he needed it to buy food, that because is a causal because. I'm sort of saying cause and effect. That's not a reason for thinking he stole the money. That's not evidence. It's more about motive. But I might say causally, Adam needed money to buy food. He stole the money. But they're very similar. That for and because function as indicating reasons for things. So if you're trying to find the main claim, the claim is Adam stole the money. And then I might offer reasons in favor of thinking that. Okay, let's take a look at example 2. It must be, someone claims, that we should each take steps to protect ourselves from criminals for the reason that the police can't be everywhere at once. What do you think the conclusion to that argument is? Well, it's that first part, right? We see in that example, for the reason that. That tells you that what is coming next is a reason for the thing that came before. So the conclusion is we should take steps to protect ourselves from criminals. Someone might say, why should we do that? The police can't be everywhere all at once. Now, this argument doesn't tell you what those steps are. Could be locking your door, could be installing a Nest camera, right? It doesn't say what the steps are. That's just the argument. So it must be that, underlined, that's a conclusion indicator. we should take steps to protect ourselves from criminals for the reason that premise indicator, police can't be everywhere all at once. One is the reason for the other, which is the conclusion. Now, finally, take a look at this. This is from a letter to the editor from the Douglas County Sentinel. I picked this source up, this example up from another text to present it to you. I don't have a date and time if you do try to look this up, but maybe the internet can help you if you really do want to find the original. But this is as it's quoted in that other source. I don't understand what is happening to this country. The citizens are trying to destroy the beliefs of our forefathers with their liberal views. This country was founded on Christian beliefs. This has been, and I believe still is, the greatest country in the world. But the issue that we cannot have prayer in public places and on public property because there has to be separation of church and state is a farce. You can pause the video here if you like to think through this example and try to find the conclusion. And if you're back with me, here's the news for you. There is no conclusion because this is not an argument. This is just a hodgepodge of assertions. You can turn it into an argument if you like. We could make it such that there is a clearly stated conclusion and we can formulate reasons given in its favor, right? If someone really does believe that the separation of church and state is a farce, there are reasons they could give for that. If someone really thought that the citizens of this country were trying to destroy it, then you would say, to destroy a country is to do this. The citizens are doing that. Therefore, the citizens are trying to destroy it, right? There's ways of turning this into an argument. But as it stands, this is just a rant. There's no unifying theme. That doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong. But if you said, is this convincing? You would say it's unconvincing because it's not an argument, right? There's no reasons offered for accepting whatever the conclusion might be. Just a bunch of claims stuck together. So I hope you kind of see the difference, right? Typically in an argument, there's some unity or cohesion around a central theme. All of the reasons presented relate to one another and connect up with the conclusion. In this case, we don't see that. So that's the last one I have. That's the last example. Let's do a quick review. We introduced the term critical thinking, distinguished it from logic, which is a tool it can use, but is narrower than critical thinking. Critical thinking is a little broader. We talked about arguments being composed of premises and conclusion. We looked at some examples. You are going to work through the chapter that I gave you. I think it is 12 pages. And we will come together to discuss that chapter and look at some other examples in the discussion forum. I will see you all there.